Yeah, like as all exams, it's not. It has some tricks. It has some. So it's very good to learn those and practice. I would say that's the most important part. That's the most challenging. From the reason what I believe I failed on the first one is that I didn't kind of practice enough. Despite maybe I was, let's say, I knew enough, but I didn't have that practice. So I think that's very important. So that's one of the things that I think as mentors. I think we can help and people can help to get people to know how the interview processes are and help them prepare, because it's, as said, it's not only about what you know and how good you are, but having practiced that particular thing that's called like the coding interview or an interview for research.
So maybe a small comment. So that also means that the interview in the recruiting process, there's also some randomness or basically luck, right? Like maybe you were unlucky in the first and you were lucky in the second?
I think it's, since there are humans in the loop, and I guess in all cases, there's always some randomness, of course, to what you get, the person that you get matched. I prefer to say that, I don't like to say that it was just randomness because I didn't get matched, but of course there is randomness, as everything in our field, also like in reviews, there's randomness, and then like you get asked something, or in all exams in a way, right? There's also this randomness of whether you get asked the questions that you know or that you're more familiar with. But I would say that apart from preparing, it's also very important that like getting rejected doesn't mean that you don't cut the bar, that you don't pass the bar. It just, I would say everyone that I know has interviewed for many companies and has had rejections in their resume for sure.
So who wants to continue? Maybe Rodrigo, since you have a lot of like postdoc experience.
Yeah, so for me, it was, so the question was about the current company I work on, so at Google. And for me, it was the first time I actually applied for a real job, right? Before I was only in academia, and Google's kind of my first real company job with, I guess, a real salary, one could also mention. I think for me, there was quite a few challenges into the move. I think the first one for me was the choice. I had the chance to be in a field that was pretty popular at the time, so computer vision applied to mobile robotics. So I actually had a lot of job offers, benefits also, I guess, of being at the Max Planck Institute. So just choosing out of all the different offers, what do I want to do? Where do I want to live? Even inside Google, I was invited to join multiple teams in different countries. So it was a tough it was a tough process to kind of really make my mind of what do I really want to join, or which company I want to join, and which country I want to join, and how does that play out with my partner, with my family. There was definitely also work on interview preparation, not to be taken it lightly. For me, it was 6 months of work, because I actually didn't study computer science as an undergrad. So for me, it was kind of, I knew obviously a lot of the topics, but it was the first time doing kind of computer science interview and exams of some form. Also, learning how to negotiate salaries was also something I really wanted to prepare. I think it did pay off in the end, and it also plays out into how do you schedule your interviews and how you do. And also maybe something worth mentioning is that there was a long time. So for me, for Google, it was more than 2 years since they first contacted me, like, hey, do you want to join Google? Until actually say, no, I want to pass the interview. And this is something that one gets to control. But it also was not quite obvious, right? From the idea of working at Google to making my mind to actually kind of crafting the offer to be exactly what I want, and not just a random team that might be a good fit, but really to get something I really wanted. This also was something that was attention to be passed. And back on the interview process, I think I benefited in the reverse. I was told, this is like informal, right? I was told that I got to apply to the position because 2 or 3 people failed the interview before. So if they had got the interview, they would have got the slot. I would have never got the job, not just the position in the team, right? There was one position in the team. So I benefited from the difficulty of the interview, maybe the randomness of it, to get actually the chance to just apply for the position. It works both ways.
Yeah, I can offer also a perspective similar to Jordi. I applied multiple times. I did some interviews, phone screens, and on-site interviews. Some of them not successful. Some of them successful, and I ended up not taking the offer. When I graduated with my PhD, my background was in geophysics. I was an expert in seismic tomography, but nothing to do with ML. I took a lot of online classes. I learned as much as I could, and I was marketing myself as this ML expert that I was not. And that was interviewers cut on that really quickly. So I started to change that and say, I'm not an ML expert. I'm here to learn. I have all these quantitative coding skills honed over many, many years, but I'm not an ML expert. And that's when I got my first serious offer. The hiring manager was actually a person who was a nuclear physicist, and so I think he saw the potential in me. And I ended up taking that offer. That was almost 17 years ago. So a little bit of a struggle at the beginning, but when I stopped saying that I'm the machine learning expert, I was not. I think that's what got me my first offer.
Cool. For me, let's see. So I currently work at Snapchat. Like prior to this, like I was working at Amazon. So when I joined Snap, it was like pre-IPO, still kind of a startup. So like just trying to calibrate how I would approach the interview, or like not even knowing what the interview might be compared to like interviewing at a more established company like Google or like Microsoft or Amazon, like because like I've been through those loops before, but this one was a little interesting. And like some of these startups, like they oftentimes like interview for very narrow or specific things, because like they're trying to do like specific things for their app. So like yeah, I basically had to carve out a lot of time to kind of think what could they possibly ask me based on the job description. So that was interesting for me, but it ended up being a fun interview.
Perfect. So yeah, I think in general, it's very important to prepare for the interview, but of course, there's a very large variability on what kind of interview you can get. So I see that a lot of companies are kind of imitating maybe Google in doing this coding interview, but yeah, maybe that's not the best, because at least here in Europe, not all companies have this, but a lot of startups are doing that, for example. So maybe we can go to the next question. So it says, when students graduate, they generally they don't know whether to apply for a PhD, to do an internship, or to take a job as an engineer in a tech company. So what would you suggest based on your experience? I think it's a very difficult question, but...
Okay, so let me give it a shot. It's a question I get asked a lot. This like, should I do a PhD, or did I do the right choice? Should I change my choices? I think the first thing I would like to mention is that it's not set in stone. Like when I did my PhD, my colleague of the office, the times we had offices, it was actually someone who had spent something like 4 or 5 years working at a big car manufacturer. And he just said to his manager, no, I want to change. And I think my way to change is to do a PhD. Will you pay for my PhD? So he says to his manager and the company. And they say yes. Right? So it exists. It's rare, but it exists that you can do a PhD after having worked in a company. It's not like one or the other. It can be done. So I think for me, the main difference between, like I wouldn't recommend to do internship if you already graduated and you have a diploma. Don't do an internship, right? Do get an actual job with a full salary. Make no sense to me to do an internship. So it's between doing company work or doing PhD. I think the main difference is the freedom, right? Like the thing you get from a PhD is you get 2-3 years of your life to research whatever topic you want with basically no constraint other than pleasing your professor, he or her. While any company work would have much more constraints and constraints of utility that would be, company needs to make money to live, right? So PhD is kind of years of freedom from in a research point of view, and there's no guarantees, right? In France, I'm French, right? In France, I did my PhD in France. The average salary after doing a PhD is a bit lower than if you didn't do the PhD, because the years you spend doing the PhD, you get a higher salary to enter, but on the same years you have progress in your company, so you get something like 10% lower. So you don't get more money, and you don't get more credits, because as soon as you get a PhD, pretty much everyone around you has a PhD, so you don't look like the smart guy in the room, not at all. So the only thing you get is years of freedom in your life to do research in something that could be completely unrelated to what you do afterwards. Like as it was mentioned here, Kevin and Darwin are working, they're using the tools of what they learned, but they're working topics that were not the PhD. So there's no guarantee also that after your PhD, you get to work on the same topic at all. So if you're looking for that freedom, then that's kind of the uniqueness of PhD, knowing that it's going to be very stressful, very difficult. At some point, most people will wonder, do they want to continue or quit? But if you know that you are interested into developing that topic, it's something that's really dear to you, then that's basically the only way to do it in my mind. That's it. That's my speech for PhDs.
So maybe we can shorten the question a bit. In which case would you recommend that people do an internship, like after they graduate?
I would really recommend an internship anyway, unless you feel you're ready to start interviewing. If you're set up your mind you want to go to industry and you're confident you want to start interviewing and apply for real jobs. An internship is really a helpful mechanism to explore and to get an idea of what industry is. It could be a summer internship, a short internship. It gives you valuable experience. Not for everybody. Definitely, there's if you feel what Rodrigo was saying, if the inclination to do a PhD and you're really motivated to do that, knowing that the PhD may not be the best thing. If you're just focused on finding a job, right? That's not what the PhD is about. But an internship in this case, I think is a valuable mechanism to get some experience.
But just to bounce back on that, shouldn't the internship be done during the studies? Like most of the programs I know, you do internship while you're studying, right? At the moment you're graduated, you already have your diploma, then hopefully you already have done internships before, right? That would be the ideal setup. And
but the way the setup works, for example, in Latin America, is that people also do internships after they graduate, because some undergrad programs, for example, and many graduate programs, they don't have internships in between. Like you don't get credits, you do internships. While in the US and in Europe, it's way more common to do it while you are doing a program. So I think that's like the direction we're aiming. Because there's also a lot of people, for example, that, as Rodrigo mentioned, that they come from like side fields like electronics engineering or signal analysis and like physics or mathematics. And maybe, for example, if they graduate and they want to get a job at machine learning, maybe they need to do an internship in between, right? At least I think this at least makes sense. So what do you think in that regard?
So let me, I would like to stress out a lot Darwin's point. I would never take a PhD as, let's say, a way to get a job or a better job or something like this, because it's not taken for granted. Maybe now, a lot of positions in research, they kind of ask for a PhD, but it's not like when I started, it was definitely not the case that then a PhD would get you better job or whatnot. And I would just do it really if the thing that you're doing is really what really inspires you, you really love it, you really enjoy it a lot, right? And that for me was the case. I ended at my studies. I found a professor that I said, "Whoa, I really want to continue more of this, of what this person is saying." And I went to them and I said, "Hey," and so I would say, for me, I wouldn't take it as, "Oh, I do a PhD because then it's a way to get a better job." I don't think that's the case, and I don't think it should be the case. And it can get very frustrating, because maybe in 5 years when you finish, then it's not the case anymore, or that. I know that, like, I also want to put that I probably should, within the big scale of world, I'm like a privileged person that I could just do my PhD, and I knew that I had family, that if things went wrong, so I know that this is not the solution for everyone. Not everyone can afford to do a PhD, right? And that's clear. So even more so in those cases where you think, well, I wouldn't. The message I would say is I wouldn't take the PhD as something that you need for then getting a better job, because I think it's not the case.
Kevin, do you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, I think internships are a great way for you to get a point of view that you might not have, when you were in school. So I think it's definitely important. Like when I was an undergrad, I did 2 internships. I did one with the Navy and one with NIST. And I also had some projects with local professors, in the physics and computer science department. And I thought I was going to do research, but ended up on the path of doing engineering instead. But I think doing these internships helped me understand what I liked and didn't like. So I think it's definitely a good thing. And if you end up liking it, it definitely makes getting the job at that place a lot easier. You have fewer loops to do at the end usually. Oftentimes they just give you a return offer.
Great, thank you. So I think Lourdes will continue with the next questions.
Okay, thank you everyone. Let's move to the third question. Graduate students in developing countries usually don't have a reasonable number of published papers in top-tier conferences or journals. Is this a disadvantage to apply as a researcher or engineering in machine learning or computer vision in Europe or US?
I can give it a try. So let's say there are two points of view, I would say. If the question is it in practice something that people are looking for and everything? I would say sadly it is. It's like, yeah, people look for publications, but in part is because, well, what else can you look for, right? In a way for research, it's like, well, someone that has graduated, like grades in the undergrad are not well calibrated at all across the world. So it's really, if you don't know the group where they come from, because it's a not known group, if they haven't publication, it's like sometimes it's difficult to know, right? I'm not saying that's the way it should be. I think it shouldn't be. I would say if the question is it really like this in general? Or from my limited experience, I would say so. I would say, yeah, it's a difficulty, of course. Yeah, and I don't know, to be honest, what's the solution and what's the best way to solve it.
Anybody else wants to add something?
I think it depends a bit on what you want to get as a job position afterwards, right? If you're really looking for a research position, at least the ones I'm familiar with, are very competitive inside even research, right? Like a company like Google has many engineers and has a couple order of magnitude less researchers. Like we have thousands of researchers, but tens of thousands of developers. So if you want to get to work in the area, then having done a PhD, as we said, is not particularly something that will help you a lot, but it won't hurt you either, right? Even if you have a couple of papers, if you can demonstrate expertise in the topic plus the normal interview skills, then that will certainly help you. But if you're applying for a research position, at least the ones I'm familiar with, they're very competitive. You need to be not a researcher, you need to be like a well-known researcher at the PhD level, right? This is the person who did this or that. And if you don't have that, then to be honest, the chances are pretty low. Then if you really then absolutely totally want to get a research position, then I would say the next step is to do a great postdoc. Otherwise, I don't see that happening, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've seen the same thing as a hiring manager. I don't hire for really deep research positions, but for those, definitely the track record of publications is really important, and being the demonstrated lead in the field for the specific team with a need, right? Computer vision or natural language processing. But that the publication record is many cases a must, because these are very competitive positions. There's on the engineering side is definitely is different. There's more on the applied skills. You need to demonstrate through maybe examples of your previous work or work in your time in academia, or special projects you have done on your own. And then there's also the applied science side, not on the research science, hardcore research person, but more on the like a data science type of role when you're a practitioner of ML and using ML to meet some business goals, and it's not about research. Maybe the pressure is less there to have that publication record.
Yeah, I think depending on the position, like a publication is actually pretty important. Like if nothing else, like a lot of recruiters kind of use these as keywords in like filtering on how to get like candidates into their pipeline, unfortunately. And yeah, I agree with Darwin. Like if you're doing a more like applied or engineering side, like I think like having examples, like maybe you have contributions to open source or projects, that kind of thing. Like this is definitely a plus on our side when we're looking for like ML engineers or applied scientist type people.
Yeah, a last comment I would say, I agree with what Kevin and Darwin said. And I would say if So like now to the audience, someone says, oh, but like, I don't know how to get these publications, there's randomness and everything. I would say right now, the best bet, if you don't have the possibility to be in a lab that might get you to get these publications and the knowledge and the guidance, I would say open source contributions to open source projects are a much, I wouldn't say, I don't want to say easier, right? But it's much safer, a much safer bet, I would say, to go for, okay, I take one of these open source publications, or open source, and I do a pull request that improves this part of it, and then you stand out for something in the field. I would say that's a very good route, that it's more democratized, I would say, in a way, right? That it's not, well, you don't need access to that well-known professor or that type of things. It's more democratized, I would say.
Great, thank you. So I will continue with the next question is, what skills do we need to increase to get an engineering position in machine learning or computer vision? Like, do we need a master's, a PhD, or just talent to resolve problems? So yeah, I think we have talked about this before, but maybe we can focus on the skill parts. Like, what skills do you need to get an engineering position in machine learning or computer vision?
I guess I can start. Like, I think usually they are looking at least for like skills in basic computer science. Like that's like usually the bare minimum. And then I guess it really depends on the organization. Like certain like smaller companies might like I won't say it's easier, but like they would be more willing to take a chance, like if you have less experience in certain things. And yeah, just like to repeat like this open source thing, or like demonstrating like that you've tried things in computer vision or machine learning is important. So like if you, I don't know, like place well like in a Kaggle competition, that kind of thing, like will catch the eyes of folks. But yeah, skills, yeah, computer science, and like I don't know how to say like machine learning. I don't know how you demonstrate that like as a skill. Like I don't know what that skill looks like, I guess.
In terms of technical skills, yeah, what Kevin said is really important. That coding demonstration of that you can actually write code that is clean and is optimized, and you understand the nuances of writing optimized code, even if you're not an expert at PhD in computer science or a computer scientist, but being able to think and demonstrate that through code, very important. If you have coding projects that you have done, please is good to include them in your resume. Put a link to your GitHub account. Just make sure that is up to date. I always click on GitHub, and it's surprising how many of these repositories are empty or there are no commits in the last 2-3 years. So that tells you something about that resume. But yeah, have that. Other than that, on the machine learning side is the math, that intuition about probability and Bayesian thinking, I think is important. And we have some things we ask in our interviews to get that intuition about the math is on top of the coding.
Yeah, I will echo what's. Sorry, did you finish? Yeah, I will echo what just Darwin said. Like, I don't know. I think there's two aspects to take into account when thinking about this. At least we say it, and we still honor it to a good extent. At Google, they say that we don't hire people for the 1-2 years. We hire people for 10-20 years, right? So that's why there's a tendency towards generalist, because we want people who are able to learn the new technique that will happen in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years in the future. So in that sense, at least what I've seen in interviews myself, I do interviews to new candidates. It's a lot more kind of on the groundwork. Like we really check that you have provable coding skills, computer science skills, that you basically demonstrate that you were able to learn in depth what was taught at, or what would have been taught at a computer science undergrad. That by itself is a really pretty high bar. Most people didn't learn what the teacher told them or what the books tell them, right? So nailing that is like very important, right? Both in the theoretical part and just the coding, right? Just like having something that you can show that you know how to code, either by having done some projects or by having some GitHub, something that you can demonstrate, or really being nailing on the whiteboard writing, right? This needs to be shown. And then on top of that, you need to have some base on just math, just like basic math, probabilities. Again, like university level, if you're solid there, that will really make you like above average candidate. You will, oh yeah, this person really learned the probability courses, really understand statistics, at a university level, not at a PhD or professional level. And then, of course, it doesn't hurt to know a little bit of the latest trends, but not because you are supposed to be an expert on the latest trend, just to know that you read papers and you know what's going on, right? You need to know, if you're doing computer vision, you need to know what a ResNet is, things like that. The more you know, the better it is. But really, at least in my experience, it's the base is the important part, and that's also the skills that will last, right? Those are the things that will last you 5-10 years. The last trend, or if you know how to use Keras or PyTorch, it's less important, because in 5 years we're going to use yet another toolkit.
Perfect. So maybe Lourdes can continue.
Thank you, Matthias. So the last question is, what are the differences in the recruiting process when applying for a research or engineering position? Anyone can start?
So I can start on this one. So I said I do research interviews at Google. And basically what changes is, other than just the discussion around which team you want to join and know which are the projects you're interested on, which is important, right? Like what actual job you're going to do. But at the interview itself, the interview composition changes depending on the position you're applying to. So at least at Google, to the best of my memory, right? So you will basically be applying for an engineering position. You will be hardcore coding interviews, and maybe one by the way, do you know machine learning, probabilities, math interview. While if you're doing researcher interview, you're still going to get hardcore programming interviews, but less, basically something like, I think it's 3 will be coding and 2 will be research, instead of being 4 coding and 1 research, something like that. It changes through time. So I know the current interviews are a bit different. It's like one more type of interview that I did about kind of like leadership skills, but still the core idea remains the same. So if you're applying for a research position, you will be probed in your research knowledge, right? So again, you're not supposed to know everything, but if you claim to be a researcher, I don't know, working in 3D reconstruction, then I'm going to check that you know about 3D reconstruction. And if you don't know what you actually work on, then you won't get the position. It sounds silly, but it's still a bar to pass. And you will also be probed in just like general research skills, like basically, again, proving the thing that you're supposed to be able to do, right? So if you did a PhD and you did research, then we're going to probe that you actually can, explore new ideas, develop new concepts, and also just have a more wide basis knowledge on actual research topics that are relevant to you, whatever you will be working on. So that's basically the difference. It's a pretty concrete difference in the interviews themselves. That's it.
Yeah. I agree that the composition for us in Snap is different for a research science position versus like a ML engineer. Like for the machine learning engineer, a typical loop kind of looks like we would have like one person ask about kind of general ML knowledge, kind of to get an understanding of the level of depth that they have in machine learning. We'll have one coding round, one person do a system design. If they're more senior, if they're not senior, we'll do a second coding round, and then another round that is kind of focused on showing that you can do something, you can code something machine learning related. So that might lend towards doing something with logistic regression or like KNN, like just depending on what kind of algorithms you're familiar with. On the research science side, I think we typically do have at least one coding round, but the composition also has like one of your sessions will actually be you presenting like your research work and like kind of like how it would apply to Snapchat. And then on the actual like ML knowledge round, I think they will go deeper kind of to probe you on like your research background and like how familiar you are with like recent trends. So like that's kind of how it breaks down on Snap side.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, but we also do obviously the present your research, which only researchers get to do that presentation. It's actually not really evaluated. It's more just to prime the interviewers to know more about your research and then to ask questions that are relevant to that.
Perfect. Anyone else wants to add something? If not, then maybe we can start with the audience questions that we have in the chat. So
maybe let me add one little thing to mention, that maybe also the underlying question, right, implies that it's a big difference between research and engineering positions, and maybe it's relevant to mention at least once that the gap in practice is not as big as people, I think, usually imagine. I think it matters much more in which team you join, and if you are in a research team and you're the engineer in the research team, you're going to have very similar activities than the researchers in that team. So I think, and the reverse, if you're a researcher but end up landing in a very production-oriented team, it doesn't matter your title says researcher, you're going to code just like everyone else, right? That's why we do coding interviews. So I think it matters much more the team you land in and the specific project you want to be working on than the big title you have on your job. That's also important to remember.
Yeah, that's true. That there's a lot, like in current machine learning and computer vision research, there's a lot of engineering work to be done, like to scale, especially if you want to implement, for example, a huge transformer to training 100 GPUs. That requires a lot of engineering by itself. So yeah, so the first question we have is if you have some recommendations for the coding interview, like how to crack the coding interview. Except, of course, looking at the book that is literally called Cracking the Coding Interview, but like general recommendations that you may have.
I can start with my experience, and yeah, my experience was okay. First, like I don't know anything about this. How do I check? And my recommendation was cracking the coding interview. I was going to say, like in there, it helped me a lot to have to know what type of things are they going to be asked and everything. But I would say that's definitely not deep enough. I would say for what you want, especially if you are not familiar with some of the topics. So how I went to cracking the coding interview. I checked kind of all the topics that were recommended. And for those that I was not familiar with, I said, okay, now I'm going to read about it. And then I went to Introduction to Algorithms, which don't be fooled by the name Introduction. It's a deep book, let's say, and in there then I would study the part that I don't know about binary search trees, right? I don't know exactly how they work, so I go there and really
this one, right?
Yes, exactly this one.
Yes, it's always in my shelf.
So definitely, if you don't know about search trees, for instance, and then cracking the coding interview is not enough, let's say, right? Like you need to study it more deeper. And then once you kind of have a bit of the broad view of, you think of all the topics and all them deep enough, then I would like for practicing either using the ones that cracking the coding interview, but now I didn't use it, but the new kid in town, it seems like all these lead code webs or all these type of webs that they are about practicing more in real, like in real examples, what you get there, right? And that practice is also good. I'm not saying that practice makes you a better programmer. I'm not saying that. But since the question is recommendation for the coding interview, I do think that makes you that gets you better chances to pass the coding interview, let's say, right? Apart from that, yeah, of course, getting in contact with someone in the company, hiring, like a recruiter or hiring committee, to explain you exactly the process. Like for instance, like Kevin mentioned, if you have a system designs question or not, like I had never done. I don't have a background in computer science, so I didn't know anything about system design. I didn't know on my first interview at Google that I could be asked that. I got asked that. I completely failed it because it's a typical thing. Like if you don't know the specific skills to know, so what type of questions you're going to get asked, I think that's a very important thing. Mm-hmm. Nudge your recruiter, ask them exactly as much as possible to know, because as said, if you know that you can be asked about system design, then go prepare for that. Otherwise, you won't pass it without knowing that specifically.
Yeah, I agree with that. And on the coding side, definitely algorithms, definitely focus on the big concepts. I'm amazed at how many of the interviews that we conduct are not successful because candidates don't know about data structures, for example, what a heap is, what a linked list is, things basic, what big O notation is, right? Being able to fluently talk about that. It's not about unit testing. You don't need to know about unit testing and all of the these are more at the SDE and the software engineering side, but definitely things that are useful for a machine learning practitioner and researcher to understand. the complexity of code is really important, and how to take advantage of different data structures, for example, to do it, and different algorithms. It's really key.
Yeah, I'll just say lead code, like that. If you're interested in practicing coding, like I think that is super helpful. Like you can code and it'll grade your submission to tell you if it was good or not. I'll also like echo like being able to know the complexity of things you're doing, because like oftentimes they'll probe you on this, like so you know the trade-offs of your solution and another solution. It also can help you like know like if you know the data structures well, you can, based on like the characteristics of the problem, you can kind of map it to which data structure might work out the best, like, or at least like for certain problems. And yeah, I think, yeah, no, I'll just say lead code again. That was like kind of the big thing that I practiced on.
So I as I said, I made a concerned effort to prepare for the interviews. It took me 6 months while I was still working inside, but I spent quite a bit of time. And also there's, I think, 4 elements I will mention to it, right? So I think there's basically 4 different stages of preparation, which I personally recommend for training. And first one, you need to get time, right? You won't get that, at least in my opinion, you won't get that in 1 or 2 weeks or even 1 or 2 months. You want to give yourself time to prepare. Because if you fail, at least in my personal belief, I want to fail knowing that I really tried properly. I don't want to fail noticing that, oh, I could have prepared 1 more month and then I would have nailed it. That feeling for me, I hate it. I don't want to have that feeling. So first stage is books, as it was mentioned. I did do something like 7 interviews at different companies, and I got all of them except 1. So I got a feeling of how different interviews look like. And you need to be extremely comfortable with this book. And it's a really good book. It's really like, start with this. If you're still uncomfortable with any question in this book, at least for Google, this would be a problem. Yeah, this should be easy for you. And the other book I used was this one, which is also in the list if you Google online of recommended books. And this, I literally read it all. Like I learned this whole book from scratch, and I knew some percent of it. Many things were new for me. And yeah, basically these 2 books alone were enough for me to know what I felt you should know for the Google interviews. But it's a lot of work, right? This is like hundreds of pages of hardcore computer science and with questions to answer and train. So books is a must. Then you have website training. LeetCode was what I used, and it's great. And it's really close to the kind of questions you get. So it's a good like getting in the mechanics of doing that. And the websites are very well designed and have a very large set of questions. Again, for me, new to this kind of interviews, computer science, it was a great way to train. But that was definitely not enough. Then I did something like 12 rehearsal with friends, which also were applying the time on the whiteboard. And it's a totally different game to be reading the books and doing things on paper and then doing on the website versus doing it on the whiteboard in front of your friends as you look silly, right? But you, when in COVID, maybe it's still remote, but no, post-COVID and pre-COVID, you do it in place and you need to get used to the silliness. That's the 3rd stage. And the 4th stage, which I strongly recommend, is that I recommend applying directly to the company you want. I think you should make a ranking of different jobs that interest you and make it from the ones you are interested but not so much versus the absolute best job you would ever want to do, and apply to all of them. And then do the interviews in that order. So start with the interviews in companies that you would like to work, but if you don't get, it's okay, right? And then that gives you an actual physical experience to go somewhere, pass an interview, get that job proposition, and then that if you get it, then it helps you negotiate the next job offer, right? Because you come to the next interview with a job offer you can discuss. It also makes it a lot easier for the recruiter to say, do I want to hire this person who already got 2 other job offers versus do I want this person who have no clue, right? So it also helps the decision process for the companies. And you get actual physical experience of doing interviews. And for me, this is not replaceable. Like the whiteboard with your friends is good, but doing the actual interviews at the companies are there. And to be perfectly honest, this is a difficulty ranking. Like the Google interview was the hardest, and the order follows more or less one would imagine. So it also helps on that you're really comfortable with the process when you get to have the harder questions where you really need to dig back into what you trained before. So it's just like Jordi said, it's an university exam. It's like a very hard university exam that you need to prepare that has nothing to do with your job. Like pretty much nothing. It's just a motivation exam of how much motivated you want to get this job, how much are you willing to train to jump the hoop of the interview. And then your job is different, and you might like it or not like it. It's a different thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think 2 points that I can add is, one is that this coding interview is very similar to this ACM ICPC, the International College Programming Contest. It's very, very similar. I did it a couple of times. Well, I think we did okay, but not of course, we didn't win or anything. but it was very useful to see what kind of like algorithms are and stuff that they use, because many of the problems, they look very easy, but they're not that trivial to solve. And sometimes if you take like the most trivial solution, you can pass the test, but it's not computationally optimal. And usually they only look about not only that you solve the task, but also that you solve it optimally, at least at in a reasonable amount of time. And that's usually what a lot of people also like struggle. And also one book that I can recommend is Algorithms in C++ by Robert Sedgwick. It was a book that I bought many, many years ago in Spanish, and it helped me a lot to understand all of these data structures and algorithms. So, Rodrigo, you mentioned you showed the first book. What is the title of the first book you showed? This one, yes.
The Algorithm Design Manual from
that's the
Skinner.
second book. But the first book you showed, the other one.
No, the first it's just a crack in the coding interview. Just maybe
yeah.
edition you haven't seen. Yeah. This is like it's a really good book. It's also a really good book because it talks a lot about the soft skills of training for the interview. Right? Not only the actual hardcore questions, but like one does ask you, why do you want to job for a company? Right? That's also something you need to be well prepared to answer. And it also talks about the scheduling, like how many months before you want to start training and so on. It's honestly, everyone recommends it. I think it's a good material.
Cool.
I just also to highlight, this is my experience. I know literal people who joined Google with training zero. Like they just walk into interview blind and they passed the interview and got in. But those are the people who were winning national competitions in programming, right? So if you're really winning national competition in programming, maybe don't prepare, just go. But otherwise, maybe prepare. It's also it depends a lot of the skills you have, right? Like for instance, in my case, even if I didn't do hardcore computer science, I had a lot of C++ programming experience. So I knew that part. I didn't need to train much about that. I knew the kind of the writing the code part, but I didn't know so much about the data structures part. And maybe one last thing I want to add about the interview is also we don't, at least at Google, we don't look for nailing everything. Like I actually botched one of my interviews. I know like I definitely didn't get the right answer. I was like stuck and it was terrible. But what they usually look for is like if the candidate is average on all the interviews, it's probably not going to get in. But if he gets like one or two interviews where the interviewer is like positive, like, oh yeah, this person, we really want to hire them, and another interview say like, this is the worst candidate ever, that you might still get in, right? It's like it doesn't need to be perfect score. It needs to be good enough. And maybe one important aspect also is to understand the game you're playing. Georgie also mentioned this at some point, like most of the people who failed the interview in my experience, either they really didn't train at all, or they didn't understand what is expected of them, right? And this changes per company. Like different companies are looking for something a bit different. The more work you can do to understand what the person is looking for, the better it's going to play. Just by changing the narrative, like when you present your curriculum, you're presenting it on the lights of what they're looking into, right? You don't say the same speech to every different company. Like every company, you study them, you study the team, you understand the people who are there, you understand what they want out of you, and then you present that for them, right? You want to be the solution to the problem. And that's something that's also kind of a soft skill that you want to train. Like the interview, you need to nail the coding, but it's more than just coding in the interview too.
So another question we have is, do you recommend to approach researchers in big companies if we do not have contacts? Like, for example, if people want to do internships or want to do joint research, would you recommend to do this? Like to basically send a cold email to a researcher in a big company?
I mean, depends a lot on personalities, but if you have something to show, let's say, that you think you stand out, I don't think it hurts, let's say, right? I said, if you have something to show, right? Just because, oh, I want to do an internship, and that's it. Okay, no, but
everyone wants to do an internship. That's the problem.
No, exactly. But if you say, oh no, I want to do an internship because of this, and I did that, and you create a good narrative, I don't think it hurts, to be honest.
Yeah, it's very important to the narrative, like the why you want to do an internship.
No, of course. But probably
from other people.
And if you if we are very good at detecting directly kind of spam, let's say, right? If you see, dear, and in another phone, Jordi, and then you say yeah, this you've sent 100 of these, right? If you see that really targeted because it's something that they've worked on, and then you might have a look and reply. Yeah, I don't see why not.
I think more than cold email, if you're actually in research, then just talking to people at the conference is probably even more effective. Like the one thing to never underestimate is the power of networking. I guess these kind of mentoring programs help for that. One of the reasons I got my job at Google, I don't know this for real, right? It's like the impression I have is because I work in an open source project with someone who ended up joining Google, right? So by the time I joined Google, I knew someone through internet, like I never met him physically, who had seen my code, right? I made CL with him and I kind of added something in this big library. And then I asked him like straight on, like when I applied, like, hey, no, we never met, but you have seen my CLs. Like we chatted like 2 years ago about this code that I wanted to expand. Could you vouch for me as a Googler for my coding skills? And he said, oh yeah, I already did that, right? Like he already actually got a notification email that was applying, and he remembered, oh yeah, this Rodrigo, I remember he did some coding. So the same goes all the way. Like if, as I said, like at least in research, you want to be known for something, right? So I know some candidates who are like, oh yeah, this is the person who did this cool paper about self-supervised matching techniques. That was a nice work, right? And then that's the kind of people you want to be reaching back, people who know you from your work, and then straight on, like as we discussed, like even more than applying, just asking for hints, right? More like, hey, can I apply? Well, there's a website for that, right? You can just apply. But asking for like, hey, which hints will give me for the interview process, or what are the recommendations, or have a specific question that I would like to answer. I think like leveraging the networking, like people that you might know, is more useful and something that you can really have an opportunity to do when you are into physical conferences. The virtual conference, let's hope that gets away fast. And also the last thing I want to add to this is that on the reverse of this, just dare to apply. I think a lot of people, like even myself, I'd never applied to Google because I never thought that would be something that would be a good fit. And I got convinced from the recruiter to actually thinking of applying. So maybe I think a lot of people also self-censor on applying to these positions. And if you're willing to do the work and you're able to go good grades on the university, there's no reason why you couldn't pass the interviews, right? So on the reverse, also just dare to apply and dare to talk to people that might be someone your colleagues in the future, right?
Right. So anyone else has a comment about this?
As a hiring manager, I get a lot of requests all the time, and I was trying to think back about all the people that have hired. I don't think I have hired anybody recently or the past few years that through cold call or through cold emailing or LinkedIn request. So if you're going to do that, do it targeted, do it in a meaningful way, have something of substance so you want to communicate and maybe relate to the researcher you're contacting. And I second what Rodrigo said, leverage your network. The referrals I get from friends and from my professional contacts, when they refer me to somebody else, they say, well, you should talk to this person, or this person that may be a good fit for you. I think those are really fruitful for me to as a hiring manager, to keep investigating and contact that person. I really respond to like cold emails or LinkedIn requests that don't have just generic.
Yeah, I also get a lot of these LinkedIn requests. I'm asking myself, why are these people adding me or messaging me? So yeah, Kevin, do you want to share anything?
Yeah, for me, cold email has never worked for me as an applicant, and as someone who gets a lot of them, like a lot of that gets filtered into spam for me, so it's kind of tough. So I would definitely agree with Rodrigo in trying to leverage your network, or in a physical conference, try to talk to these people. I think that's important.
But let me play devil's advocate here. How do we then make sure that we don't fall into so we're talking about network, we're talking about going to physical conferences. That's something that it's not in access to many people, right? In underdeveloped countries or even like to a lot of people, right? How do we make sure that we're not just feeding ourselves with just the elite people and like rich people and people that have access to these people, right? I don't know. To me, open source, like Kaggle, open source contributions, it's one of the ways, but I know it's a safe bet, right? Okay, I just take someone that I know it's going to be good, but like then I'm worried about the false negatives, right? What all the very good people that just simply because they were born where they were born, or because then they don't have access to these things, right? And that's something that worries me. And yeah, I don't know what's the solution, to be honest.
So on the flip side, I did do my personal experience. I did get a couple of jobs with emails, cold emails. So this was a while ago. No, I'm old. I'm getting old. So this was 15 years ago. But when there were 2 times in my career where I did like a bold move. So when I moved from Chile back to France for my PhD, it was just 1 email. I literally researched a lot. Looked at a lot of different labs, and narrowing down 2 that really passionate me on the topic. And then literally my mom, I was young at the time, my mom just told me, why don't you send an email? And I just did, right? So well prepared, well researched, full PDF for my PhD research program on the first contact, right? It's like an actual real work email, but it was just 1 email. I sent the email, they replied, then they made a phone interview. I think I rocked that phone interview. I was extremely prepared. I knew basically where the interview was born, everything, the food he liked. I knew everything about this person to nail the interview. And then from that, I got an offer to do a PhD and moved to France. And then when I finished my PhD, I moved into computer vision, having done 0 papers in computer vision. I only work in robotics. And I applied to a hardcore computer vision lab. And they knew that I had 0 experience in computer vision, but I worked really hard on preparing the presentation and convinced them that although I had no paper, I had a lot of knowledge on the topic. And they took the bet, and the bet paid off for them because I think I did okay in making papers at that lab, and that worked out. So, and that also was applying by straight on email, right? Like I just send an email to the professor and there. So I will say that maybe in academia it's a bit easier to cold email and go there, because the reality of it is that at least in Europe, we are starving for brains. And for what I understand, US, given the immigration policies, is the same. Like the whole world is starving for brains. So if you can demonstrate that you are a smart person who is passionate and can actually crack the problems that you're supposed to work on, this, at least in my experience, at the time I was applying in the fields where I'm applying, there was actually a lot of opportunities to get there. But you need to prove that you have the stuff, right? And that's not everyone managed that. But if you have it, then the opportunities are there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That especially in Europe, the visa policy is quite friendly, and you are usually looking for talent, and usually that's usually the problem. So maybe we're going to close soon. So we got the last question that Rodrigo and Jordi, both of them don't have a computer science background, and we were asking how they compensate for this. How they compensate for not having a computer science background in a very computer science dominated field, including machine learning and computer vision.
In my case, just preparing for the coding interview very well, and yeah, that's it, right? Probably if I had a background in computer science, so I would know by heart what's a binary search tree. When I started coding, doing the interviews, preparing the interviews, I didn't know it, and then so I had to prepare it. But beyond the coding interview itself, I don't think it's that critical to have a background in computer science. Background as understood as a degree or being an undergrad. Yeah.
Yeah, my decision process at the time was more like, which are the skills I feel I can learn by myself, and which are the skills I feel I cannot learn by myself. So I'm still under the strong impression that if you study electronics, then you can more easily learn computer science than if you're studying computer science and you want to learn electronics. Neither there are impossible. I know both directions, but it's somehow today with internet and the books and just people around, it's kind of, at least for me, it felt a lot easier to learn computer science afterwards, kind of outside of the university, than learning electronics outside the university. And the same would go for anything else. Like if I like chemistry, I'm pretty sure it's a lot easier to learn chemistry at university than learning it at home versus computer science you can learn at home the other way around. So I think it's, to be perfectly fair, computer science as a topic is probably, out of all the topics you can learn, maybe with maths, is one of those topics that you can easiest learn kind of on your corner on internet. If you have a computer internet connection, you can really do a lot. So yeah, it was a lot of self-learning, and I obviously did quite a few projects by myself when I was younger, and then at university, and then and then I did some open sourcing, as Jordi said, and then for the specific of the interview, as I said, I worked 6 months. Maybe if I did undergrads in informatics, I would have worked for only 3 months, but it took what it took, right? You do what you need to do.
Yeah, I think in general, if you study, for example, engineering, a lot of skills are transferable, like to computer science, because like in many engineering schools, you still need to learn some basic coding skill, very, very basic. and you can probably work on that, like by doing courses on the internet, books, and so on. So in general, I find that it's not that difficult for many fields, like even physics and mathematics. They also know, especially if you study in a faculty of engineering or something like that, that you learn some basic skills that you can always transfer. But of course, if you're farther ahead from that, like if you come from humanities, yeah, maybe that's more difficult. But yeah, life is like that. Like I think this is also very common in Latin America, that we don't have to like very good choices for like curricula, because like in the US and in Europe, the curricula is way so much more flexible than in Latin America. I think you've probably seen that if you do, for example, a computer science degree in Latin America, the curriculum fits and you have very little choice on which courses to take. And if you say, okay, maybe I study electronics just because like it was the program where I got in, but actually they wanted to study computer science, they cannot really like select courses in between. So I think that's one very Latin American specific problem, because the curricula is kind of not outdated, but like the structure of the curricula is very, very strange, I would find. So yeah, yes.
Let me add also that I would even make the reverse argument, at least in the places where I work, and especially in Google, but even in academia before, I never felt that someone will snub me for not having a computer science undergrad. All the opposite. I think there's like where companies and research labs are looking for smart people, and the more diverse the background, the merrier, right? So actually having a slightly more exotic background is more of a plus than a minus, because one, you know this other thing that fewer people are familiar with, and two, you have proved that you can learn a new skill to the level you can pass the interviews, right? So this proving that you are able to kind of be flexible and evolve in your knowledge adds a plus. And again, at the workplace, it's a lot more fun in discussions if everyone has different backgrounds than if everyone did exactly the same thing. So it's almost, if you can do it, and if you want to do it, I would say it's more of a plus than a minus to not having done a computer science undergrad. But at the end of the day, study what you enjoy, please.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was meaning something different, that of course diversity is important, but for example, here in Germany, like if you take a 6-year degree from Chile, you can do 2 bachelors here in Germany. Like for example, you have a bachelor in cognitive science and then in computer science, then you have a lot more background than if you do the same degree in Chile or in Argentina or in other countries. So it's also like affected by the educational systems of each country. So yeah, maybe Lourdes can now close up the session, because yeah, we're kind of a bit over time, but I think it's fine.
Okay, so thank you everyone for being part of this session, and to our panelists for being here with us. We learned a lot about your experiences, and we are happy to have you here, and I hope next year we will see you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your sharing your experience. It was great. And see you around the conference.
Bye.
Yeah.